Hello and welcome back to the Joe and Toby Talk podcast, where we do exactly what it says on the tin and we talk. Usually rubbish, to be honest with you. But today we are going completely left of field, something neither of us have particularly talked about before on main channels anyway, and we are going to be talking about probably the most famous film franchise of all time, certainly the longest running film franchise of all time, and that is James Bond. Both of us are passionate fans of that. I have been a fan for over 20 years now, and well, the other person in this podcast has been a fan for significantly less time, and that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to talk about Toby's first year as a James Bond fan, and we're basically going into this, no script whatsoever. I mean, we never script things, but we've got no talking points. We're just going to see how this goes, and I hope that you enjoy listening to us talk about this, and if you want to hear more like it, then do let us know in the comment section. But I will throw it over now to my wonderful co-host, Mr. Toby Jones, who has been on the YouTube grind recently, haven't you? You even had a video out, not celebrating, but commemorating the death of the great Tina Turner, who, again, is related to the Bond franchise. And you got that out on the day of her death. So I was shocked at the speed you got that out, Toby. Are you feeling all right?
The day after.
Okay, within 24 hours. Within 24 hours.
You can imagine the scene, right? I got back from work on the Thursday, set everything up, recorded it, and my internet upload speed is shocking. My granddad lives down the road, 5 minutes down the road, and his internet speed is perfect. Now, I started uploading it on our internet connection just to see. 4 hours. So I put it on my external hard drive, went walking down there. I'd even put something in the oven for dinner while I did it, because I thought I'm not going to be that long. Sure enough, plugged the hard drive into the computer down there. 10 minutes. And it was up. No brainer. And my tea was done by the time I got back. So absolutely perfect.
And you got to see your granddad, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. But I don't know. I had to be a little. Well, the main reason I went down is that there was a parcel there for me, which was another CD. Which I think that there might be one or two many of those now. I've got 860, now, which is only going to grow. Is the problem, because we don't like to get rid of things, and this is coming round to something. I promise. James Bond, the whole completionist idea. First off, before I talk about me, well, I'm going to talk about me, but more other people. Now, before I watched the James Bond franchise, obviously I was aware of it. Aware of all the actors. Aware of most of the film titles, but not a lot about the films, the specifics, obviously. But I went around speaking to a lot of people over the years, and regularly came with the comment of, "Oh my God, you've never watched a James Bond film. It's a British tradition. How can you have not watched the James Bond films?" Well, now I've watched all the James Bond films, and it's amazing how many people you bump into, because I had this idea in my head that everybody had watched the James Bond films. Now, a lot of people I don't speak to that many people. Not got that bigger social circle. But these same people who said, "You've never watched a James Bond film," it turns out they've only watched the Daniel Craig films. Yes. Now, for me, that's we're not going to talk about Daniel Craig just yet, but that's neither use nor ornament. For me, pardon the pun, it's everything or nothing. That you either go whole on it or you don't. And that's exactly where my collecting days started. And I'm going to try and make this quick and come round to the main point and not waffle.
Take as long as you want, Toby.
My relationship with James Bond started here, which, for those of you listening and not watching, is 007,
all three of you.
007 Agent Under Fire on the PlayStation 2. Now, I think it was 6 years ago, I rebought myself a PS2, probably thanks to the man on the other side of the screen. And I don't have anything to thank him for because I now have a wardrobe full of PlayStation 2 games like Rugby Challenge 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, PES 2002, 3, 4. You get the picture. And one of the games I bought was this. And those of you, again, so there's 3 people watching, probably a third of a person, might remember that I did a short-lived series playing Agent Under Fire. And it was short-lived; it didn't last very long. But
this is when you were becoming more than just your F1 YouTuber. You'd got back into doing FM on the channel, and you'd started doing a series called Retro Sundays. And obviously, I can't remember. You played the Vin Diesel game and all sorts, didn't you? But this Agent Under Fire Let's Play, I remember that well. I remember that very well.
Reasons. Didn't last very long, but more recently, only as you will know, in the last couple of weeks, I've actually gone and played the game in full. Luckily, not on a camera, but on the PS2, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Albeit needing about 6 instruction manuals to get me through it, but that's how good I am at video games. Again, because of the whole I buy everything on PS2, I also ended up buying 007 Nightfire, 007 Everything or Nothing, and 007 From Russia with Love. And in fairness, I don't think I've played bits and pieces of these, but not completely. But that was, I can think, where my Bond adventure started. And quite a way after that, it was not long after I started my job, and back end of 2019. It must have been before the pandemic, so maybe just before Christmas 2019. On Facebook Marketplace, there was a listing of 15 or 16 Bond DVDs locally, £5. And I don't particularly know what consumed me, but I thought, sod it, let's go and get them.
You like a bargain, don't you?
Yes,
you do like a bargain.
That's what consumed me. I'm too tempted to go, I can't turn that down, let's go and get them. So I did. Went and got them. Oh, they're all very nice. And what I did at the time is I... and waste of time, really, in the end. Like most of the things in my life, you think, you know what? That was just a waste of time, wasn't it? But I got all the discs and put them on a computer program called Handbrake and converted them to MP4s and put them on the very same external hard drive that I went down to my grandma's with the other day. And what I did at this time, because I'd started going to charity shops by this point, which was and this was like the middle of my vinyl record mania. Where again, I'd buy every record I see. See the pattern? And also I'd buy the odd DVD here and there. Because at this point I wasn't really into films at all. I'd watch the odd film, but maybe one film every 3 months. So, considering that I've watched all the James Bond films, clearly that would have condensed a bit, because it would have took a while to watch all these James Bond films if it was once every 3 months.
Yeah.
So I'd buy the odd DVD, and I don't know why I just don't know at the time why I did it. But anyway, I'd put them in my computer, convert them to Handbrake to an MP4, put my external hard drive in the TV, and then watch them. When the easier thing to do could have been, it's a PS2 game, but get the disc out of the bloody case, which I'm doing anyway to put it in the PC. Either put it in the PC and open a media player, or put it in the Xbox I've got, or the Blu-ray player downstairs. Just watch the damn thing rather than... Why I did that, God knows. But, and again, I don't know what compelled me, but one night, late 2021, in fact, the 6th of September, 2021, I was sat there, scrolling through my hard drive, what had I got on there to watch? And I thought, I've had these Bond films a while, let's start. So, the reason I've been quite timid here is I've got all the Bond films stacked like that. and I'm just feeling that if I take one out, it's all going to go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And on the 6th of September, I watched this, Doctor No.
Mm-hmm.
And I messaged you at the time. You were ecstatic. Great, you're starting. And I think I said it was okay. It was all right. And then a couple of weeks later, I watched this from Russia with Love. And I'm not going to go through every single one and say, then I watched this, then I watched this, because it's a bit pointless. As the as the DVD drops out of the slipcase. So a couple of weeks later, I watched that, 21st of September. And then nothing until February 2022. Because, and I think you can probably expand on this, I think that the issue with those, especially the earlier films, is that the formula's not quite established yet, is it? It's not. It's not catching it now. I like From Russia with Love, I think, a lot more than Doctor No, but the formula's not quite there yet to entice you to watch. What happened later, especially in the Roger Moore films, there was such a formula that just almost just really wanted you to keep coming back. But in the early days, that maybe wasn't there. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I think I probably said it to you at the time. And believe it or not, I mean, I've got you into a lot of my interests over the years, and most of these interests have very few people that follow them. James Bond is a very famous franchise. There are a lot of fans globally, but growing up, there's not been many people that have been as big a Bond fan as I am. So, of course, I was ecstatic when you started watching it. But yeah, the first two are very different from the rest, I think. I think once you get to Goldfinger onwards, it is, as you say, very much a formula. I think Goldfinger was probably the template for that. So naturally, the first two were quite faithful to the novels, whereas I think they started taking a few more liberties from Goldfinger onwards with the source material and making them more possibly suited to the big screen. That doesn't mean to say that Doctor No and From Russia with Love are bad films. In fact, they're probably some of the best in the franchise. If you look at them in isolation of what they started, and obviously at the time they were very, very popular. So, you know, and I know people see From Russia with Love as the Hitchcock film of the franchise, and it was very much a thriller rather than perhaps action adventure. I would say you probably have from Goldfinger onwards. I wouldn't necessarily call them thrillers in that sense. So yeah, I can see why. Certainly, if those are your first two films that you're experiencing as a Bond fan, I maybe you're not hooked straight away. And that's not to say they're bad films, but that's to think there's another, at the time, 23 of them.
Yeah.
You know, might put people off, and that's fine. I think most Bond fans actually start somewhere in the middle of the franchise with their first film. I know lots of people obviously grew up with Roger Moore as their Bond, and therefore probably started with something like the Spy Who Loved Me or Moonraker, possibly Octopussy. A lot of 90s people started with GoldenEye, and therefore you sort of work your way back. Me personally, the first Bond film I remember is You Only Live Twice, so that was very much within the sort of formula age of the Bond film, and therefore I guess that's what hooked me. But yeah, so I think possibly people that are starting now that might start at Doctor No might find it more difficult to get engaged, and maybe that's why we do have people that are just Daniel Craig fans, if you like.
Well, while you've been saying that, and I've been listening, trust me, I've gone back and it's brilliant. Messenger, you can search for certain terms in your whole Messenger chat. And it's gone back to, well, I searched for Dr. No, and it went back to 2018, and I'd messaged you something along the lines of, I've been having banging headaches for a couple of days, and you said, shouldn't you go and see a doctor? So that was the first instance where Dr. and No came up. But on the 13th instance, I told you that I watched Dr. No last night, and you said, awesome, what did you think? And I said, corny and cringy, but good at the same time. The special effects were marvellous, but then 1962. And you said, to be honest, it's the first one, so it's fairly down in my rankings. Future films just do it better.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty consistent with what you say there. So, yeah. My iCloud has signed out, which has got all the dates I watched these films. So, just loading that back up to carry on with the story.
Yep.
But yeah, I watched From Russia with Love, and nothing for 5 months. Didn't watch another one till Feb, and I think that was it. That I was just not that bothered. I think around that time, thinking back, I guess that was fun. I don't think this was all to do with it, but it was Football Manager season that was just coming out, so that took up time. After that, not really sure. And then end of February rolls around, and this is going to be probably the last time I do this because I'm nervous about the whole pile of DVDs just crushing on the floor. On the 20th, it's nearly happened. On the 25th of February, I watched this, and this you can tell it's not scripted, can't you?
Yeah.
I watched Goldfinger, which was an absolute pleasure. And until Skyfall, and yeah, you're going to cringe a bit, but we're all different. Until Skyfall was my number one Bond film, and that set me off, albeit not quite as such, because there was something else that happened that really set me off into watching all the films. But watch Goldfinger, and then watch Thunderball the week later, and well. To go from the classic of Goldfinger to Thunderball, just as an idea, I've got Goldfinger as second on my rankings, and I think I've got Thunderball as 23rd on my rankings. So very much two different ends of the scale with those two films. But then again, after that, 2 months, didn't watch anything. And then, it was probably a little bit later actually, but I just started watching the films again because I think at that point I hadn't got trained into watching films regularly, so I just wasn't that bothered. But I watched You Only Live Twice on the 13th of May, so a couple of months later. And actually, there might be a reason I've just thought of, because you can tell my memory works in strange ways, I think like everybody. I'm not going to get the DVD out. But on Her Majesty's Secret Service, I had the problem, as I alluded to, that in that job lot, there was about 16 Bond films, which obviously isn't everything. Now, we had a couple of Bond films, just like from the parents' DVD collection, what was left of it. But there was 6 or 7 left to get, and Majesty's was one of those. And that's one of the only reasons I can think, maybe, that I had the gap between Thunderball and You Only Live Twice. But found Majesty's in a charity shop, and watched You Only Live Twice, knew it was going to be Lazenby next, worried about what was going to happen, because obviously the first 5 is Sean Connery, that's all you know. And then it goes to Lazenby, and I absolutely loved it. And not knowing anything about the criticism of Lazenby's acting and all that, I genuinely, at the time, I'd maybe think a little bit differently now. I thought Lazenby was a better Bond than Connery. Which might get the channel shut down.
Yeah, we've just lost everybody now. Yeah.
But I loved that film, and it's obvious now that a lot of other people love it as well. I thought it was absolutely excellent, and if anything, almost the end of an era, as odd as it sounds, because then we obviously go to Diamonds Are Forever, which brings Sean Connery back, and that was disappointing. I think after you have the crescendo of You Only Live Twice, which is a mutual favourite of both of ours, then Majesty's. So the first time we get 2 real killer films in a row, both of these in my top 5. And then Diamonds Are Forever, which is by no means a bad film, but I think for me an average Bond film. at best, I would say. So then after that, we go to Roger Moore. And I was worried about Lazenby. I was very worried about going to Roger Moore because I'd heard from people, because I'd said to people at this point, I'd started watching the Bond films. By the way, just for context, I watched You Only Live Twice on the 13th of May, Majesty's on the 19th of May, and Diamonds Are Forever on the 22nd of May. And by the 22nd of June, I'd watched A View to a Kill.
Mm-hmm.
So you can then see how quickly I moved through everything. And then by the 22nd of July, I'd watched Spectre. So I moved through very quickly after that.
Mm-hmm.
But very Marmite, Roger Moore. And I thought, am I going to love it? Am I going to hate it? And you, I can't remember whether you thought I would or not, because I know I mentioned this to you before I watched Living Let Die.
I said you would enjoy it, because you're sort of into 70s and 80s cheese, aren't you? A little bit.
Okay.
Music-wise,
right.
at least.
Oh, thanks. Well, we'll get onto that in a future podcast where we've lost everybody plus one. And anyway, watch Live and Let Die. Funnily enough, I think among a lot of people, it's a bit of a favourite. It's not one of mine. But
I think I echo that. It used to actually be one of my favourites, but I think it's one of those films that's possibly aged a lot worse than others, and I'm not particularly bothered about the racial aspects of it per se.
I don't think I'm bothered about it, but I do think it plays not actually in terms of the aging of the film, because I know where you're coming from there. But I think the whole premise of it is that different to anything else that's come before. Plus, you've got Roger Moore. It's a lot to get used to.
Yes,
I think,
and it's one of the only films in the franchise where Bond doesn't wear a tux, which, funnily enough, the other one is You Only Live Twice, and Q's not in it. They made a very conscious effort at the time, the producers, of making that film very different to Connery. So instead of vodka martinis, he drank bourbon. He didn't wear a tux, obviously. He didn't even use a PPK much in that film. He obviously had the sort of revolver lugging gun towards the end of the film. But I think the other aspect of it is that it was the first film since Goldfinger, I think, to be filmed in a different aspect ratio.
Yeah, I've heard this. Yeah.
So, I think Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, Majesties, I think were in widescreen format. Then it went back to the sort of television style for Diamonds, Live and Let Die, Man with a Golden Gun, and it only really got back to that cinematic blockbuster from Spy onwards. I think so. That's potentially another reason why it feels older than it is.
True. So I watched that, and then I watched Man with the Golden Gun a couple of days later, and I liked both films. Didn't love them, and I was okay with Roger Moore at the time, but didn't fall in love with Roger Moore as a Bond. And then this came along, and The Spy Who Loved Me, for those of you who are listening, and loved this. And bearing in mind that since You Only Live Twice and Majesties, which I said were two great films, you went through this kind of barren period for me, where you've got Diamonds, Live and Let Die, and The Man with the Golden Gun on the full list, all in the bottom half. So I hadn't had a killer film for a while. And I do wonder whether, because for context, so 5 out of the first 6 Roger films, obviously The Spy Who Loved Me accepted, funnily enough, are all one after the other on my ranking from 14 to 18. So I do wonder if The Spy Who Loved Me hadn't come along till, say, a couple of films later, whether I might have switched off by then. It's an interesting thing to think of, or whether, I'd have lost interest. But I just loved The Spy Who Loved Me. At the time, it went to 3rd on my rankings, so in between You Only Live Twice and Majesties. And I think this was really the film that set me off with Roger Moore. Moonraker, watched that. Now, I loved Roger's performance in this, but the film itself irritated me a bit. And I feel like Moonraker is a Marmite film anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think personally, when I come to rewatch it, which I will do at some point, I think it'd be a lot higher. I think it's one of those at the time because The Spy Who Loved Me, I think, was so genuine almost. I think because Moonraker went so far the other way, it was really frustrating. And I think a big point, just to sidetrack, is how people rate these films. I think is very different when you watch them just as a one-off from when you're watching them chronologically. And
yes.
that is best example of that is For Your Eyes Only. Yes. Because when I watched that after Moonraker, again 4 days later, I thought that was great as well. And it was the perfect tonic after the bombast of Moonraker. Now, it's one of the only films, and the Blu-ray's over there, I can't quite reach it. It's one of the only films that I've gone back and watched since. I saw the Blu-ray in a charity shop recently, bought it for 50p, and I thought, well, I'm going to watch it again. And, by the way, the quality was fantastic. It's really I need to go and buy these films on Blu-ray and watch them next time, definitely. But I just didn't enjoy it so much. I think watching it as a one-off, it feels a little bit dull. But I think that was exactly what was needed if you watch Moonraker before it. So I don't know. It's a very tough one how you would rate that film. Do you rate it as effectively you should do as a one-off film, like all of them? They're a part of a series, but obviously they're a film in their own right. As I said, I think there's some merit to that idea that For Your Eyes Only is much better as a tonic after Moonraker than on its own. I'll let you comment on that.
Yeah, it's a film I used to find pretty dull. It was one of my lowest in the franchise, and I don't think I ever particularly watched them in order. So it would never really be one that I'd reach for. No. Probably for that reason. I think, in more recent years, certainly ITV show them in order. And, I would watch them every Sunday, every year. Every year when they won, every Sunday I would watch them. And that would be how I watched Bond generally. I'd also watch them from time to time in isolation on DVD or now Blu-ray, but that's how I used to consume it. And then For Your Eyes Only tended to become better for me. I used to enjoy it more. It's definitely one on more recent viewings that I've enjoyed a lot more. I think because as I've grown older, I've come to enjoy Roger Moore a lot more than I used to. I like the cheesiness. I certainly like Margaret Thatcher at the end of that film is hilarious. And it's got all of the Bond elements in there. That car chase is great. I really like the music score as well. So that I think all comes together for me to really enjoy that film now. But yes, it took a while, I think, to really appreciate it for what it is. And I've also become a massive fan of the John Glenn quintilogy. All of them are massive Bond films for me in terms of enjoyment now.
I can just hear the Sheena Easton track going around my head.
Yeah.
Because at the time, I love that. And that's something we haven't talked about, is the music part of Bond. I think before watching the films, I knew Goldfinger, Diamonds Are Forever, Shirley Bassey. I knew Thunderball. Beyond that, obviously I knew Live and Let Die, but preferred the Guns N' Roses version. Bar that, and Skyfall as well, Adele, which we are quite an eclectic mix, but that's just me. But the music's such a big part because I also, again, from the charity shops, here comes another prop. Got this, which is a CD, The Best of James Bond, which is basically just all the themes, although irritatingly not in any sort of order.
Oh, okay. That's
from
interesting because I have a copy of a similar CD that is all in order.
So it goes from, just as an idea, it goes Goldfinger, Nobody Does It Better, Boot to a Kill, For Your Eyes Only, We Have All the Time in the World, Live and Let Die, All Time High, Living Daylights, License to Kill, I'm going to go quick now, From Russia with Love, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, Moonraker, Majesties, Golden Gun, Diamonds, Golden Eye, and Tomorrow Never Dies. So it's in an absolutely non-coherent order at all, really. It doesn't make any sense. But I think the music's a big part, because both Joe and I are big music fans, and I think that the Bond music does definitely play into it. But the biggest thing that played into me watching the James Bond films, and the biggest part of me watching films regularly now, is discovering a little old website app called Letterboxd. And for those of you who haven't heard it, whenever I talk about Letterboxd to anybody, it's the Facebook for films, basically. Letterboxd describes itself as effectively a social media outlet for films. So on Letterboxd, you can journal your films, which basically means whenever you've watched something, you can make a diary that you've watched it, which is exactly what I was doing, but on an iCloud document. You can make rankings of films, which is exactly what I was doing on this iCloud document. And you can add friends on there, you can see what they've watched, and then read other people's reviews. And there's other functionalities to it. And one big part of anything I do, as Joe will know, is I love tracking everything. Whether it's reading, watching, listening. Did I say reading?
Yeah. Playing.
Jigsawing.
Collecting.
Anything. Discogs is a big thing I use. Goodreads for books, Backlogged for games. Is there any more? I think that might be it. But I just love the idea of having a diary of things. So Letterboxd fell straight into it for me. And that was a big thing that at the end of the film, I could go on there, put a rating on, I'd watched it, add it to my ranking list, look at the ranking develop, and that was such a big thing for me. And that's what really sped me into watching the film. So from Your Eyes Only on the 18th of June, by the end of June, I'd watched Tomorrow Never Dies.
Wow. Yeah.
So I'd got to the end of Roger, I watched Timothy Dalton's 2 films within 2 days, which, by the way, I think is a real shame.
Yeah.
Because I'd had so long to enjoy the Sean Connery era, not a long time to enjoy the Roger Moore era, because I'd watched the only thing, obviously, with Roger era is it's 7 films. So
yes.
You do naturally get screen time. But the Dalton era just went by in a flash. So I get to this point, and Roger Moore's my favourite Bond. And then I watch Dalton, and I'm like, because again I hear people saying, funnily enough, about Dalton, no, he's not very good. I'm thinking, is Dalton my favourite Bond? And funnily enough, on some days he is. I go with the idea that Dalton is the ultimate, for me, the ultimate James Bond in the character, the believable nature of it. Roger Moore's just my favourite for the hell of it. Because I love watching Roger Moore play James Bond. Yeah. It's probably not the most believable performance, but I have the most fun watching Roger Moore. But I personally think Timothy Dalton is the ultimate James Bond character. Obviously, he played it very straight, which, again, a little bit like the Moonraker For Your Eyes Only idea, was the perfect tonic after some of the ridiculous comedy that... And some people turned off. And you went from a very different style. Yeah. And that, funnily enough, I think in some ways it's reflected somewhat in the music, because you obviously had Duran with A View to a Kill, which felt like, the start of a new era almost. Because before that you'd had Carly Simon, Shirley Bassey, Rich Coolidge, quite
Well, it was very ballad heavy, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And then you're getting this new wave coming, and it feels like a new era. And a view to a Kill Starter at, which is why it's my second favourite Moore film. Funnily enough, I'm getting to a point here where actually everything in the James Bond franchise is Marmite. When you a lot of things are, when you think about it, because
when it's something that big, that vast, and I think, I've heard it said many times, no two Bond fans will ever have the same ranking of Bond films, and I think that's what almost sets it apart from almost any other thing, really, is that so many people, I see with Star Wars, there's a general consensus of what's good and what's bad. With Bond, that just isn't the case. There will be some people out there that have Die Another Day as their absolute ultimate favourite film, and
really,
I do believe that. I do believe that, and and yet there's some that will swear blindly that The Living Daylights is the worst film ever. And that's what I think is great. But there's no real animosity that I've ever seen of people going, "Oh, well, you're an idiot because you think that Pierce Brosnan is the worst Bond." I've never really seen that happen before. So it is. It is, as you say, it's lots of things are very Marmite, but I think it's because people are able to be open with their opinion about it with Bond, and I think that's something that should be celebrated, really.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with that. So Dalton's probably at this point. I had the contrasting emotions between the two, and then Pierce Brosnan comes in, which I know is somebody you're a big fan of, particularly with the GoldenEye, and I was disappointed with GoldenEye. I know a lot of people have this near the top of their list, but I felt after losing Dalton that was really a direction I wanted to explore more, because I really enjoyed those two gritty films, and I don't think it certainly wasn't a return to what was done previously, but it felt more like the natural formula. So that was disappointing in itself. So I wasn't the biggest fan of GoldenEye, but it was about mid-table in my ranking, so it was 12. And then the three films that come after aren't as good, albeit I think it goes a little bit wavy, a little bit up and down. Tomorrow Never Dies is a bit of a non-event for me. I enjoyed The World Is Not Enough. That was just below GoldenEye in my rankings, but maybe on a rewatch it'd be higher. And then Die Another Day until another film come along afterwards. Was the bottom of my ranking, and I think that is something that most people can agree on, that Die Another Day was a bit of a misstep. I'm just seeing the whole water CGI scene in my head, and that's such a famous dodgy scene, but
it's one of those things where I sorry to interrupt, Toby.
Go ahead.
With Die Another Day, I think if you watch the first hour of the film and then press stop, I genuinely think it would be top 6, top 7 Bond. I think it's that good. I really do. And I think if they kept that up for the whole film, I think it would be an absolute classic. I think it lost its way in the middle a bit, and I agree. I'm not that bothered about the special effects. I think I think the story just becomes a little less believable after the halfway point, and I think that's what lets Diamonds Are Forever down, is the end. And I think the end of Die Another Day is very, very similar in terms of the laser blowing up things and supercars flying out of aeroplanes, and it all gets a little bit too silly. And it's an interesting one because there's a lot of silliness in Bond, and sometimes it's just the right side of it's funny and it's still just about believable, but for some reason Die Another Day, and maybe it is the special effects that causes it, maybe that's the problem, and that's why it's not believable, because somebody didn't do the stunt. And yeah, I think it's quite sad actually, and I think it's because of the second half of that film that we're in the position we are today, unfortunately. But
Okay, that's interesting. So within the space of a fortnight, so 2 weeks before this, I'd just watched For Your Eyes Only. A week after, I'd watched License to Kill, and then watched Die Another Day. So massive variance. We've jumped forward 20 years in 2 weeks, and then after that, because my parents hadn't watched No Time to Die yet, they asked, because they knew I was watching the films, could they watch the Daniel Craig films with me, and then we'll watch No Time to Die together. Okay, great. I hadn't got No Time to Die on DVD at this point. Ironically, I only got that today to complete the collection for that purpose only. And we watched
spoiler alert.
Watched the Daniel Craig films, and they were very up and down. I think the Casino Royale definitely feels like because they completely rebooted things. That irks me a bit. Again, because I'm watching this basically back to back, it's frustrating. But with a 4-year gap, it's completely understandable. So I enjoyed Casino Royale. That was probably a top half film for me. Quantum of Solace, that was a disappointment. That was the lower third of my rankings, which, again, I think most people would agree on that, but some people think Quantum of Solace is a wonderful film. Then we come to Skyfall, which is my favourite Bond film of all time, for now. I know you're not a big fan of Skyfall, but I think that just the way it was done and the relationship with M, particularly in that film, was something that I don't think was explored before, and I really liked the direction that went, and really enjoyed that. Funnily enough, I also enjoyed Spectre, which is like another he's another swear word when it comes to comes to Bond. I feel like maybe I'll rank that a little bit too high. So,
funnily enough, I came out of the cinema for Spectre thinking, "Oh my god, Bond is back to normal." Certainly, I didn't like the Brofeld storyline. I didn't like that. I thought that was completely stupid. I didn't like Blofeld's reappearance. However, I thought they brought humour back into the film. I thought they brought excellent stunts back into the film. I thought they brought... It just felt, he had a white tuxedo on at some point. It just felt like they'd realised, right, we need to start making more nods back to previous films in the franchise. They had the gun barrel right at the start of the film, which for me is an absolute must in a Bond film. So when I came out of the cinema, Spectre, I was like, wow, that's great. The thing with Skyfall, I do enjoy it a lot more nowadays. However, it was absolutely built up to be the best Bond film ever in 2012.
Even I remember that.
It was crazy. And then I went to go and see it, obviously as a huge Bond fan. Didn't think much of Daniel Craig already. And then watched it, and I felt a bit disappointed. I felt, is that it? It was good, but because of all of the hype, I was like, oh, well, why isn't it as good as Moonraker? Why isn't it as good as The Living Daylights? That's what I came out and thinking. Why it's not Bond. Also, I was like, we've rebooted this franchise. How on earth does he have his Aston Martin DB5 with the guns and all the gadgets and all the plot holes that came with that?
He's aged 20 years in 4 years as well.
Yeah. And there was a long-standing theory that there was this video game called 007 Legends, and basically that was to tie in with Skyfall. Obviously, it was the 50th anniversary that year, and you play through the pre-title sequence of Skyfall, and obviously Bond gets shot and he falls off the train into the water. And the idea behind Legends was that while he was in this water, while he was dying, I suppose, he was having these flashbacks to previous Bond film experiences, and they'd picked a Bond film from each Bond actor to put Daniel Craig in. So it was Goldfinger, On Her Majesty's, Moonraker, License to Kill, and Die Another Day. So there was this theory that perhaps between Quantum of Solace and Skyfall, he'd somehow lived the other 20 films in that. Because of the game, maybe that's what happened. Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, then Doctor No, all the way to Die Another Day, and then Skyfall. But then that was all thrown out of the window by Spectre. But
yeah.
But at the time, I was like, right, okay, I can explain that away then.
Yeah, just about. So after Spectre, I got to a bit of a sad point because it had been such an adventure. This, I'm never going to have it again, probably, because as you say, it's such a long-running franchise that I thought I've watched all these films, and of course you big the effective last film up, and it was called No Time to Die. And if you don't want to know what happens, switch off here. Very sorry, but
it's been out 2 years now.
I think most people can gather what happens here, what goes down. And I heard it was called No Time to Die. I'd heard people kind of mention things, but nothing mentioned explicitly. And I kind of guessed that something happens at the end of the film, which I'm not going to like. I'm still giving you a chance to switch off, folks. And it was about 2 weeks later we watched No Time to Die. Saw the runtime of 2 hours 40, and I don't know if it was for context. Let's have a look at this, because this will tie in a bit, albeit loosely. I can't remember whether I'd watched the Elvis film before or after this, because the Elvis film again was actually it was before this, so it was the 2nd of July I watched the Elvis film, and that film was also 2.5 hours plus. And I thought the Elvis film was perfect. Went by so quickly, and it was excellent. So, came in tonight, No Time to Die. It was 2 hours 45, was it? Something along those lines. Yeah. And I thought, this is going to be a long, hard slog, but I'll go along with it. So, started watching it, and the first half of the film maybe was okay. It was good. Maybe sort of halfway in the rankings. Neither here nor there. And then they introduced the villain. By the way, the villain isn't really there for a lot of the film, which I think is one thing that massively lacks. And the villain's really not that compelling, albeit, he's Freddie Mercury, for God's sake, but taking that away from anything else, he's not in it enough. And I just got the feeling that it was trying to tie everything together. And this is where I started to get a bit nervous. And we'll fast forward, and the inevitable happens, and James Bond gives up and dies at the end of the film. And I was proper raging when that film finished. Because after watching all these films, I thought, and I remember I wrote a review afterwards. I said, this is Bond. You can't kill Felix Leiter off. And you definitely can't kill James Bond off. The end. Now, they did that with M, obviously, in Skyfall, but I felt like that worked. It was almost a natural progression. With No Time to Die, in the last scene when he gives up, it doesn't feel like it's something that has to be done. It feels very much just like, right, Daniel Craig's leaving, so we'll kill him off. It wasn't one of those, because there's been points before in the franchise where it could have been done, and a lot more believably than this. And No Time to Die really disappointed me. And I saw other people that had watched it and thought it was good. And I had in the back of my mind thinking, I genuinely wonder whether maybe people that have just watched that film again in isolation thought it was a lot better, because there are a lot of films that you get to the end, the hero dies at the end of the film, and it actually turns out being a pretty good film. But it doesn't work with this film, I think, in conjunction with the rest of the series. So I got a mate of mine to convinced him to watch all the Bond films. And he still bloody enjoyed No Time to Die. So maybe there's no answer to this, but No Time to Die really disappointed me. And went all the way to the bottom of my Bond ranking.
Yeah.
And that was it. So that was the end of Bond for me. But crucially, what Bond then started was an interest in other films. So from then, in August, I went and watched the X-Men franchise. Went and watched the Planet of the Apes films in October, and other bits and pieces. And I've watched a couple of Roger Moore films. I've read his autobiography, which I'm just going to pick up. My Word is My Bond, which I'm giving to you when I next see you, because it's excellent. Thoroughly enjoyed that. I actually bought this today, which is his final memoir, which I'm going to read at some point. I've also bought these, which is a biography of the great Sean Connery, and Roger Moore's Bond on Bond, and even an audiobook of Live and Let Die. And that's maybe where I want to go next, and this is what I wanted to gauge your opinion on, because you've read one or two of the Bond books, haven't you?
Yes.
Well, seeing as you've introduced me to everything else you're into,
yes.
Are you going to give me a compelling argument to start reading, or maybe listening to the Bond books?
Well, I mean, for me, the last 20 years being a Bond fan, probably more like 21 years, actually. I remember Die Another Day coming out, so I'm just forgetting how old I am these days. But I've been a Bond fan a long time, and obviously in the early days of me being a fan, there was a lot of video games that were coming out pretty much every year, so I could play a lot of Bond. There was obviously the films to enjoy. 2006 comes along, and you get 3 films in 6 years, which, you know, nowadays we'd snap people's arm off for that. So there was Bond content out there. 2012 comes around, and that's the last Bond game up until, well, when we're recording this. There is a game coming out at some point, but that stopped that dead. We obviously had Spectre in 2015, and then No Time to Die in 2021, and no real idea of when the next Bond film will be coming. So as a Bond fan, it's very difficult to have new content to go on. And I did a lot of deep dives on the music of Bond a few years ago, particularly sort of the film music. And I had a real interest in that. I've been a big collector of Bond toys and memorabilia, that sort of thing, but they don't come out anymore. So the last thing that I have, really, that I haven't accessed before, are the Bond books from Ian Fleming. And about a year ago, I bought a full collection of the Ian Fleming novels for, I think it was about 30 quid, which is pretty decent if you look at the prices now. Obviously, we're in the 70th anniversary of Casino Royale this year. And I read Casino Royale pretty quickly. I tend to do this with books. I don't read very often, but when I get into something, I read it pretty quickly. So I read Casino. I absolutely loved it. It was it's very of its time. I think that would be the thing I say about the books, is that they were written in the 1950s. So if you're reading it expecting the cinematic Bond to be there, it won't be particularly. There's lots of stuff in there. There's lots of characters that will pop up, and you'll be like, oh yeah. And actually, the 2006 film was quite a faithful adaptation of the novel. So certainly, Casino Royale, you'll think, oh yeah, I know how this story goes. But I always do this. I've read Casino Royale, and I'm sure you do similar things, and I jump straight into the next one, Live and Let Die. And again, really enjoying it. Read about a third of it, and then just stopped. I ran out of time for reading it, ran out of that momentum, and it's one of those things I've put it down, and I've not gone back many times. Every time I pick it up, it's fantastic. I don't know why I've put it down for so long, but what I should have done is read Casino Royale, left it for a while, and then when I was ready, picked up Live and Let Die and read that. Live and Let Die, very much License to Kill vibes, interestingly. That there are characters and elements of the film Live and Let Die, but there's a lot of License to Kill in there as well. So I'm about halfway through Live and Let Die, but I would definitely recommend it to anybody that's not read Bond before. I think there's a lot in there that's new for any Bond fan. Obviously, you've got the 2 unofficial Bond films as well. If you haven't watched those, like Toby, he hasn't watched them.
It's on the list.
It's on the list. And Bond YouTubers. I have to say, Bond YouTubers have added so much to my depth of content for Bond. It's quite unbelievable, really. And there's one Bond YouTuber in particular that I've watched for about 10 years now, and his name's Calvin Dyson. I know you're a fan of him as well, Toby. And that has added a lot to my fandom, really. And through that, I've found various other Bond YouTubers, but I think looking for that content is crucial, actually, and on keeping the franchise going, because we're in such a hiatus at the moment. Obviously, filming stopped for No Time to Die in 2019, and I'd be very, very surprised if in 2023 we hear anything about Bond 26. And they've sort of bought themselves some time because they killed off the main character. And you sort of brushed it off very well. You said you were raging about that. And I remember me and the other half, we went out to watch No Time to Die on release. There had been, obviously you wouldn't have been aware of this really, because at the time you weren't a Bond fan, but during the production of No Time to Die, there was bits and pieces. Danny, is it Danny Boyle? It is Danny Boyle, the director, sort of parted ways, and the rumours was that Danny Boyle wanted to kill off Bond, and that's why, and they were at a creative impasse. And then obviously throughout the COVID years, it was about to premiere in April 2020. When obviously the lockdowns hit and it got delayed another 18 months, and there was various rumours throughout that time that Bond was going to die in No Time to Die. And I just thought that surely not, that would be suicide for the producers, because what do they have then? And how do they explain him coming back in the next film? Which is exactly the problem they're in now. And I remember saying to the other half, because we went out for a bite to eat, I was like, yeah, there's no way they're going to kill him. And I'd heard some of the music score. I'd heard the On Her Majesty's Secret Service elements of that. And I thought, well, what's going to happen is he's probably going to marry Madeline Swan and she's going to die at the end. That's probably what's going to happen. Or she's going to die fairly early in the film and it's all going to be about revenge over her. It's going to be similar in vein to License to Kill, where Bond's an absolutely broken man at the end of that film. I think it's a terrific film, License to Kill. And seeing Timothy Dalton, and his suit's all ripped and he's got blood all over his face after he's killed Sanchez, and you just feel, wow, that man's lost everything. And I thought that was going to be how No Time to Die went, but alas, it didn't. And we're in the position that we are now. So that's why I've been looking for other ways of accessing Bond content. And yeah, the books have been my way of doing that. And there's not just the Ian Fleming books. There's plenty of continuation novels out there. There's even novelizations of the films that I think I might go back and try and read, but there's only 24 hours in a day, isn't there, Toby?
Right.
And there's so many things that I'm sure we'd all like to do. And hopefully one day I will get to do all of those things, but yeah, it's finding a time and a mindset to do them, I think, is the big one.
That's absolutely right. I mean, we could go on for hours, because that in itself is an interesting talking point, but we're doing a Bond podcast, so let's park that idea. I think what you said about reading is a great point, because I've got to a couple of points where, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate books on my bookshelf that I've got bookmarks in, because I've started reading them, like you said, left them for a bit, and just haven't gone back to them. And by that time I thought, I want to start reading something else, and reading something from the middle is so difficult. But I have been reading quite a bit, actually, the last 12 months. That's such a great thing with, and that's what I want to emphasise with Bond film as a whole and everything, that I have to say that before I started watching Bond and films in general, I used to spend a lot of nights just scrolling through Netflix and YouTube and all the rest of it and finding something to watch, and inevitably being a bit bored and not having much to do and going to bed early and all this. And what's great with any entertainment form is it does what it says on the tin, entertains you and keeps you active, and you spend so many hours of your life at it. So I think film has really entered that gap. Obviously the Jigsaws, I'm a big music fan, and film is very similar to music for me, that I'm a bit of a completionist. I'm going through the majority of Denzel Washington's films at the moment, among other things, and ranking those and rating them and really enjoying that. I would struggle, because I know there's a lot of people who just flits on Netflix from night to night and watch random films. It doesn't seem right to me. There's got to be some sort of theme or something like that. I tend to stick to a set of actors or a film series, and I wonder whether that's been born out of James Bond. I don't know. Possibly that's something that's took place with books. You'll notice that I tend to read autobiographies, so I've read Roger Moore, read Steve Davis, his autobiography, which again is on your pile, as well. Read Jensen Button's autobiography recently, a biography of Michael Schumacher, and a couple of other bits and pieces. But again, I wonder whether that's the structure of that has come maybe from Bond. Who knows? But I have to say that as a whole, to summarise what we've been waffling on about for the last hour, I think James Bond has only been positive for me. The first year of being a fan of Bond has been great. Absolutely fantastic. I want to park the films for a while. I thought a couple of times about going back to them, but I want to park them maybe until next year, maybe the year after, and go through the process again, because I'd love to see how my rankings change going into it.
Well, hopefully you'll have Bond 26 to build up to by then. So
yeah, quite possibly, that's true.
Yeah,
but I think that would be nice to do. I don't particularly want to watch any of them particularly just as one-offs. So I think that might that might change my opinion. I just want to park Bond like that for a bit. But I have an interest, like you say. I would like to maybe read a couple of them because I think that would be interesting to do. Or at least I've got the one audio book which I got from a charity shop. Like, go about it like that. I don't know. But yeah, I think Bond's been really great for me. So, albeit most of it was off my own bat, some of it was you. So thank you for that. And there's been so many other interests that you've got me into that I won't thank you for because they've took so. And it's funny. I was grinning there because you said it might not have been in exact words. His name's Calvin Dyson. And all I could think, and this is going to be an inside joke, nobody else is going to understand. Roger Whittaker, her name's Joni Mitchell, and I was just grinning because I was just thinking of that in my mind. But it is funny, isn't it? That I mean, have I shared any of my interest? Well, obviously I didn't have any interest before you come along. But I guess what interests I did have when you came along, I guess we were shared, weren't we? F1, football, cricket, the sport. I don't think there's...
Yeah.
I've not been able to get you into rock music, or I wouldn't try. But, I think it is great that we've got so many shared interests, because I think that we do nag each other on Messenger quite a lot. And
I think we both... Well, I don't, certainly personal experience, not a lot of people in my life have those interests, so it's good to have somebody else that understands in a way.
It's a nice tonic, isn't it? Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, you're one of only two people that I know Roger Whittaker, so
well, I wouldn't say that's like a big prize, is it? But,
well, no, but it is.
It's a feeling. It's a feeling of acceptance, I think.
Yeah,
isn't it really?
Yeah.
But what I think this weekly podcast does, funnily enough, we would probably. This is talking to you guys in the outside world now. All three of you that are left. We'd probably have these sort of chats maybe once every couple of months, probably. Because we used to talk a lot, but then life gets in the way.
Yeah,
so it's really nice having this slot every week just to talk about things, and I think on the whole it's stuff that you guys are interested in as well, or else you wouldn't watch ultimately.
Yeah, this will be the big test. If you're still here listening to this, then you must be fans of us nattering on.
The worrying thing is if this does well, where do we go from here? Because we could go a lot deeper.
I mean, we have such wide interests of things, and that was one of the reasons we came back to doing this, because one of the problems we've had in the past is snooker runs till May.
We were shoehorned into one aspect.
We'd always be talking about snooker, then talking about F1 for a bit, then talking about snooker, then talking about F1, and it was just a bit, that's not all that defines us, really. And I think also it brings us to how we ran our YouTube channels as well. I think people came to watch a series of us and expected that that's all that we made. And I think we've always been more than that. And I think this podcast sort of is just that now. And we will just talk about all sorts of stuff now. And hopefully people will enjoy it. But, if nobody does, it won't stop us doing it.
We enjoy it. That's the right thing.
We enjoy it, and there is a massive Bond community out there, and perhaps there's new people listening to this that have never listened to us before. From that very franchise, certainly on Twitter. I'm going on a bit of a tangent here. But recently, I've put out a couple of Bond tweets here and there. And I'll get followed by 3, 4, 5 people that are interested in Bond. So it is something that I think people want to listen to. So hopefully that's replicated today, and hopefully people have listened. And if you are somebody that's maybe been like Toby in the past and have heard all these people saying, you've never watched James Bond, and you've listened to us talk about it. I mean, you know how it ends now.
Sorry.
But there's 24 other films to enjoy that you don't know the ending to, and hopefully we tempt maybe just one or two people to go and enjoy a couple of Bond films. They're on. If you flick through the channels on a night time, there's bound to be a Bond film on ITV4 or ITV2. Go and check it out. You don't even have to go to the charity shop and spend 50 pence on a DVD. They're on all the time, and give them a go. And one last thing I want to ask you, Toby, before we wrap up. I think it was last night you watched what a lot of people consider a bit of an unofficial Bond film. I don't consider it an unofficial Bond film, before we continue. But, of course, it stars one of the original James Bond, so for some people, the James Bond, the definitive James Bond, Sean Connery, and that is a film called The Rock. And what did you think of that?
Well, before I answer that, a couple of things from my side. The ITV versions, they are highly edited, so don't watch License to Kill on ITV4 because you'll be disappointed. Number two, if you're going to watch the Bond films, stop after Skyfall. That's my best advice I can give you. And then in answer to your question, before I answer it, a bit like a politician, you know what you said earlier about having high expectations for Skyfall?
Yes.
This is exactly what happened with me in that film last night. Not to that degree, but I watched, funnily enough, this time last week, the Ford versus Ferrari film, Le Mans 66.
Yeah.
And I'd got high expectations of that and was a bit disappointed. I gave that a 7 out of 10. I also gave The Rock a 7 out of 10. So before you panic and think that it was entirely terrible, I was a bit disappointed because I know you had said that it was excellent and it's probably your favourite film of all time. I enjoyed it for what it was. I was a little bit disappointed that the plot actually ended up being quite simple in the end, in terms of how it was set up. It was very linear in the way things went.
Mm-hmm.
I was also disappointed it was Ed Harris who was the villain, because I've watched him in 4 separate films and he's been the villain, and I actually quite like Ed Harris and his acting, so I'd rather him be on the good side rather than the bad side. But I actually said in my review on Letterboxd that I think he's a really compelling villain and would probably be up there with some of the really good Bond villains, I think.
I think he would have made an excellent Bond film villain. Yeah.
Sean Connery is excellent. His Scottishness has become even more pronounced by age, but that was interesting with the whole accent thing. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I have to say, it's been one I've wanted to watch for a while, particularly knowing that you enjoyed it. And it was a good film. Whether I think it's an unofficial Bond film or not, it's a bit of a halfway house, actually. I think it could be seen like that, as many people do have these drawn-out Bond fan theories, but
the codename theory being one of them, Toby.
Yeah. Should we just end before we talk about that? But in answer to your question, it was a good film, probably a 7 out of 10.
Yes, yeah. I think that's what I'd recommend next to you, is a good deep dive on the career of Sean Connery, because I think he's very much defined by Bond, if all you've seen is Bond films, but actually Sean Connery, in my opinion, is one of the best actors of all time, and some of his films are just absolute all-time classics for me. So films like The Untouchables is fantastic. I think you'll enjoy that one. The Hunt for Red October is a cracker.
I've watched that.
He's good in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade.
The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah, I mean, I've not personally seen that film, I'm going to be honest. But, particularly his 80s and 90s stuff is very, very good. And actually Never Say Never Again, which is an unofficial Bond film. It is still a Bond film, but just not made by the proper people. That is watchable because of Connery. So... I would highly recommend that as an avenue to go down once you've done Denzel
Yeah.
Denzel's deep dive. And I think you
And
should
tell you,
give Pierce
the only
Brosnan
thing
another go.
the only thing we haven't mentioned is that you've got a bloody Bond YouTube channel. You've kept that
Well,
one quiet during this podcast.
yeah, well, I've kept it quiet in general, to be honest with you, Toby. I do have a Bond channel. You can probably guess what it's called. All of my channels are called Captain Goodspeed something. So, if you want to go out there and check out some of the videos, I think I've made about 5 on there. And that is definitely something that I want to do properly. But as we say, Toby, that I wish there was 30 hours in a day.
Listen, if I can do it, anybody can do it.
Yeah.
But I heard what you said about Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, before watching Bond, I had watched him in a couple of films. One of them being brilliant, excellent. One of my favourite films. This is
Mamma Mia?
Doubtfire.
Oh, right.
No,
okay. Sorry.
no.
Sorry. Yeah, Mrs. Doubtfire is a cracking film.
I've watched him in a film called It or IT, not the It that some people might think of. And he was okay in that, but I don't know. As a Bond, just doesn't do it for me. I can't. Sorry, but
Fair
hey,
enough.
as you say, maybe I can give him a second chance. And to be fair, most of the music albums I listen to on the first occasion, I think that's not very good, and then all of a sudden, I'm listening to them non-stop for the next 2 months.
Well, I did notice there was 2 Take That albums in your haul today, so...
Well, it was free for £1, so...
Yeah, you had to fill it up, did you? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
that's for another day.
I know. It was just to finish off on. And everybody has a favorite Bond actor, and I know you've said yours is Roger, and on some days Timothy Dalton, and it resonated with me so much, that comment, because there's 4 actors for me that I can't separate.
Craig, Lazenby.
Well, you know what? No.
Oh, that's a shock.
Yeah, Connery was always my favourite. And I think it's because I love him in other parts as well. Obviously, The Rock is my favourite film, so it kind of makes sense that Connery's my favourite. But I never... And You Only Live Twice is my favourite Bond film. But I never reach for a Sean Connery Bond film. If I want to watch a Bond film, I never ever reach for that, unless it's You Only Live Twice. And actually, I think maybe only 2 of his films are in my top 10. And I think that's something very similar with a lot of Bond fans. They say Connery's my favourite Bond, and then you say, well, what are your favourite films? And they'll say Goldfinger.
But look at me, Roger Moore. It's exactly the same argument.
Yeah. And I find that really interesting. As I said, Roger's really, really grown on me over the years, and some days, I would say he's my favourite. And then I think about Timothy Dalton, and I'm like, oh my God, Timothy Dalton's just amazing in the part. And then, personally, in my opinion, Pierce Brosnan encompasses all 3 of those actors, actually, in his performance. And I think that's maybe what some people don't like. I think he's got the humour and the charm of a Roger Moore, but he's got the suave of Sean Connery, and he's got sometimes the grit and coldness of Dalton. So... I just think his films are such action epics, and obviously the video games, most of them are Pierce Brosnan, so I'm kind of biased in that way. So I find that really, really tough. I find it really difficult to choose between all 4 of them, because I think they're all really, really good in my opinion. And then I'm glad we've not dwelled too much on Daniel Craig in this podcast, but that was one of my Bond tweets that actually got quite a bit of support, was talking about Daniel Craig being the worst Bond. Quite a few people seem to agree with that, which I've never seen that before, so I was very, very happy about that. But I think we've talked for long enough about that, much longer than I think either of us thought was possible, actually. And funnily enough, I think we could talk for another 2 hours about this. I really do. I think that there's a lot to talk about with Bond. But we are going to end it there. And I'm going to throw it over to the people listening to continue the conversation down in the comments. Because, as I say, everybody's got a different opinion on Bond. And I would certainly like to hear probably the everybody's top 3 Bond films, and I just want to see how different everybody's is. I'm gonna place a good amount of money on that. We'll see Goldfinger and Spy and probably Skyfall in those top 3s, but I think they'll all be different. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and of course go and check out Toby's channel, simply called Toby Jones, where I'm sure he will talk about Bond at some point on his channel. He's doing a great job at the moment, encompassing the world of music and film and all things in between, really. So do go and check him out on that. And yeah, leave a like if you have enjoyed this one. Get involved down in the comment section. And of course, click the subscribe button so that you never miss one of these rambles. And we will see you same time next week, where we'll be discussing something else random. I'm sure of it. See you later.